Hello and welcome to the LNN Week Recap this Sunday, where we have the latest foreign updates alongside domestic alerts. Now, most developing situation now, Estonian attack on Friday has resulted in devastating losses for armoured units. The attack targeted a heavily defended Castellan position guarded by round-the-clock infantry and attack helicopter patrols. Despite overwhelming Estonian air superiority in the region this week, 12 attack helicopters were able to unleash over 1,000 rockets onto ground targets. 35 out of the 50 brand new Rhino tanks that were sent to the battlefield were destroyed, alongside over 200 Humvees and transport trucks. Following the crushing defeat, all combat operations have been halted as leadership demands answers on how the catastrophe occurred. One general has already been fired, specifically the overseer of the Northern Castellan Front, Tori Jarin, and has been given a notion of no confidence and has been relieved of command. I'll say that again. The overseer of the Northern Castellan Front, Tori Jarin, has been given a notion of no confidence and has been relieved of command. He has been replaced by the highly respected Trade Josh. It is now up to Trade to restore public trust in a war that's beginning to seem hopeless. In other news, since the mass relocation of thousands of abroad toads in Chestonia and Castia, major international airports in Tokchester have been crammed to the point of closure with fleeing citizens. Thankfully, the blockage cleared around Wednesday, though some families only returned home as late as yesterday due to living in difficult-to-reach areas. However, there are still families waiting to be sent home, so we here at LNN highly advise that if you have not already gone to the airport you were assigned to, you head there immediately. If you live too far away from an airport, or have not received any information on which airport to travel to, please contact the following number: 01344304490. I'll say that again. If you live too far away from an airport or have not received information on which airport to travel to, please call 01344304490. We now move on to our weekly security brief, where we cover notable military movements in the Castellan-Estonian War and on the domestic front that have already been mentioned in this broadcast. Firstly, before what was being called the catastrophe on Friday the 8th, a smaller skirmish broke out between 3,000 Estonian troops and 7,725 Castellan troops. The battle only lasted a few hours, however it still resulted in hundreds of casualties. On the Estonian side, 3 Rhino main battle tanks were destroyed alongside 868 infantry losses. On the Castellan side, 2 Jaguar tank destroyers were lost alongside 260 infantry. Secondly, with the ground war raging on, a new front has officially formed, the air front. Hundreds of planes each day now go head-to-head just to secure a few hours of air superiority. Estonian F-16 Falcons battling Castellan buses have also had a devastating impact on the ground, with aircraft and debris constantly falling from the sky. 32 Castellan and 15 Estonian citizens have lost their lives from falling fragments alone. The Castellan government has responded quickly, re-establishing air raid shelters not used since the Second Great War to shield civilians whenever nearby air battles commence. Looking domestically, equipment from the Royal Mechanized Armed Forces have been deployed in Castia. However, it must be noted that no automatons have been deployed in Castia. Not only would the connection between the operator and the automaton be sluggish at best, but such a move would also be viewed as a direct declaration of war. Most of the cabinet has agreed that the shipment of weapons was the correct decision. However, there are still voices opposing the move, one cabinet member stating, "We must return to our native reserved cells." Moving away from the reports of war, we now move on to the 10th annual tennis tournament. The first results to be read are from the Urban Assembly Cup, followed by the Provisional Grounds Cup. The first match of the Urban Assembly Cup this week was between Coldharbour and Dragsted, resulting in a Coldharbour victory. The second match was between Starkhill, located within the habitable zone, and Eastford. The match resulted in an Eastford victory after an extraordinary comeback. Starkhill appeared likely to win after a superb performance in the first game. However, the second game became neck and neck, with a 6-round deuce eventually won by Eastford. The third game that ended in a clean sweep by Eastford, securing the match. Lastly, for the Urban Assembly Cup this week was the match between Milford and Brookhaven. The close game between the two cities resulted in Milford victory. Now, for the Provisional Grounds Cup, the first match this week was between Fernbridge and Hartwick. The 2-game match resulted in a Hartwick victory. The next game was between Barrowfield and Goldwick, and after a very back-and-forth 3-game match, Barrowfield secured the victory. The final Provisional Grounds Cup match this week was between Eastbrook and Dalehurst. After an almost complete sweep lasting 2 games, Dalehurst won the match. Now, before we move on to our domestic stories, let's cover a developing situation coming out of Vidbia. Around 26 rebels attacked the border checkpoint alongside the Vidbian-Castian border. The attack was repelled by border personnel. However, analysts suggest it may be part of a wider conspiracy to permanently, or at least temporarily, close the border to Castian refugees. This belief comes from the fact that this is not the first shootout between border personnel and rebels. In fact, it is now the 5th incident since last Wednesday. There's not yet been a direct government response to the rogue border county. However, given the lack of any other pressing concerns for the Vidbian government, we do expect action soon. Now, moving away from international stories, let's move on to domestic news. Earlier this week, specifically on Wednesday, the Grand Duke himself announced that Towchester will aim to launch a 3-man satellite mission used for microgravity experiments and planetary observation within just 7 months. The historic aim comes after just 5 years of ground construction here on Terra. We'll continue to update you on any rocket launches, with the most recent scheduled for Tuesday at the Crown Cap spaceport just outside our capital. The launch window is expected to be between 1 and 1:30 p.m. Southern Toad time. Another story, this time firmly on Terra, the Grand Duke himself has ordered homeless shelters be modernised in the Toad for Toad Act. Structures once viewed as scars upon the street will in the end appear no different than the surrounding buildings. Their interiors are also being revised, with plans to hire government-funded cleaners and professional mental health staff to operate the shelters. During the reconstruction period, residents will be temporarily placed in nearby flats. This sparked some outrage among citizens concerned that their flats may eventually become overwhelmed with homeless residents. However, the decision to avoid abandoning sheltered residents during reconstruction has been largely viewed as positive. Additionally, homeless shelters will now focus heavily on re-education and job placement rather than simple sheltering. Many have praised the move, as the shelters previously consumed millions of coins from national funds simply to keep the lights on and mouths fed. Speaking of funding, 50% of the entire act will be funded through a crowd-sourced charity campaign, the first in history. The Toad for Toad charity is aiming for a staggering 1.4 billion coin goal. Officials say that every coin donated will help make streets safer and better looking. If you wish to donate any coins to this act, please visit toadfortoad.td.gov. I'll say that again. If you wish to donate to this act, please visit toadfortoad.td.gov. Now, before we end tonight's broadcast, I do have some announcements to read to you. First off, the far northern highway connecting Towchester to Ocastria has been closed due to roads freezing over. Both nations have deployed teams to combat the freeze, however it may take several weeks before the route is reopened. Secondly, due to the rocket launch on Tuesday, all tourist visits to the Crown Cap spaceport have been suspended. However, inside tickets to watch the launch are still available, though they are rapidly running out. If you cannot secure tickets, do not panic, as there is still room for millions of toads on the surrounding hills. Lastly, the Republic of Tinland has closed all aerospace connections after the virus spread semi-virally throughout the country. The virus is believed to originate from pathogens naturally carried by toads that have affected the Tinnish population. That's all we have for you this evening. Our broadcast will resume at 6 a.m. after the night service. Other than that, I've been Steve, and this has been the LNN Weekly Recap. We'll see you tomorrow.